Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
As folks are wandering in, feel free to let us know where you're calling in from. Hopefully you guys are someplace dry and fairly boring this week. It's just getting to where it stopped raining here in Maryland. So summer's over. It's 49 degrees. It's gross. I don't like it. I'm ready for Tampa events.
It got cold here in South Carolina last week for the first time.
It was
got
just
the 60s.
Yeah. It was just like overnight it got cold. I'm in long sleeves already. Like that's just not supposed to be a thing. So Anthony's from wonderful wet New Jersey. Yeah, New Jersey is probably just as wet as us. So not far away. I'm right down on Kent Island here, Anthony. So on your way to lovely DC. So we'll give everybody 1 or 2 more minutes just to sneak their way in here. I'll look at Mr. Schofield in lovely Greenville. I guess they got largely spared here. Parts of the Carolinas just got beat up, but
we're having a fence built, and some people were supposed to stop by Friday and work on it. They looked at the weather and said, "We're not coming Friday," and then Friday was
we'll see you next month. Yeah. I talked to an MSP who he got lucky. He had a 100-foot tall tree fall in his yard, and it took out his fence, his neighbor's fence, his neighbor's back deck, and missed the house by 2 feet. He said if it had gone any other direction, it would have taken out his house and somebody else's house. So some folks have gotten incredibly lucky, some other folks not so much. So we've got some partners that are scrambling to keep everything together. And doing the start of fall in Texas. Fall in Texas has to be when Texas becomes tolerable, because I feel like Texas gets hot.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't mean to insult anybody by saying Texas isn't tolerable in August. It's just not my choice of destination vacation. So, all right. Well, I think the revolving door has kind of slowed down. Folks are finding their way in. So, Martin, why don't you and I get started?
Sounds good to me.
I'll let you kind of lead it off, and you can tell us who is Martin White and a little bit about Ruffian Software.
All right. I'm Martin White. I'm the founder of Ruffian Software. I founded it specifically to do privileged account management software for MSPs, which we'll talk about. And what about you, Alex?
Yeah, so Alex Farling, one of the co-founders and channel chief over at Lifecycle Insights. We built this platform because I had an MSP. I was just like you guys, and I cussed and complained and bitched a lot about quarterly business reviews. They were miserable, so we aimed to make them less miserable. So that's kind of where we're starting from. Martin, you owned an MSP, right? You've been on both sides of this. Am I right?
I didn't own it, but I worked for
okay.
MSP for 12 years. I was the head of the development wing that did all the support software for the MSP, did backup integration software, like malware recovery software, all types of stuff, and saw the problems MSPs faced firsthand. It's different than enterprise problems.
And so you've been in the same shoes as everybody on this call. The interesting part that I always found was at my MSP, it was really hard for us to swallow our own medicine, I guess, sometimes. It was really easy for an MSP to become the shoemaker's kid with no shoes, right? We try and do everything on a shoestring budget because, well, if it blows up, we can fix it. We're getting to a point where that just doesn't scale. And at my MSP, when we launched Lifecycle Insights, one of the things I did was hand account management over to my team and tell them that they had to start doing account management for my MSP. Which was kind of interesting, right? It forced them to give me a budget. It forced them to give me a quarterly business review and to hold my feet to the fire and keep me on task. That said, we're kind of talking about exactly that today, about leading by example and what you can do to help that MSP lead by example. Did you guys do anything in your MSP that really encouraged that lead by example, or encouraged you guys to do what you ask your customers to do, to eat your own dog food?
Yeah, we offered all kinds of services, and just like our clients. And then similar to you, we had a process in place that determined what we did, who we did it for, what we quoted, and then correlated all that. And then just like with the privileged account management, if you didn't have that traceability and accountability, you couldn't go to your customer and say, hey, you need to have traceability, you need to have accountability.
Right.
So
Yeah. And, you know, I'll be fully transparent. That's one of our core values here. We weren't good at it in the beginning. You know, in the beginning, we were a break fix shop. We transitioned slowly over time. And we found that as we transitioned, the need to take it serious didn't keep up with all the new things we were deploying. So it was kind of we played a game of catch up there for 6 months or so in my MSP, where we were really digging ourselves out of a hole. So if you're on this call and you feel like maybe your MSP doesn't lead by example today, don't take that as a shot. I always talk about everything we do as an MSP being a journey. And this is a journey. We're going to give you guys 5 examples today of what we think are really good steps for you to take along the journey, maybe some good starting points to getting you better aligned with the same best practices you're putting out there for your clients. But also, these are things you can take to your clients as you've done them internally and kind of improve the value of your relationship with your customer. So with that, let's kind of jump in. We'll talk about 5 important steps to leading by example. And the first is pick a framework. And something popped up on LinkedIn just yesterday, and I forget what the conversation was. Somebody was talking about frameworks, and I said, you know, CIS is my favorite. It's what we use here at Lifecycle Insights. CIS actually has a developers framework as well, or a developers part of the framework as well. So we use that in conjunction with what AWS has. I was a fan of CIS in my MSP. It was, in my mind, small enough chunks to be digestible and very prescriptive. So if you weren't aligned, you could kind of learn what you were doing. But what's your favorite framework, Martin? Where are you guys starting from?
Because the MSP I worked with came from the healthcare industry. We picked HIPAA to start with. And then once you've done any one of the frameworks as an MSP or as any sort of company, once you've done one framework, all the work that you've done in that framework really translates really well into the other frameworks. So once you've done that first heavy lift and you've become CIS or NIST or something compliant, you can quickly knock off the rest of the compliancy emblems and get done a lot of things.
Yeah, there's a lot of cross maps out there. If you just go Google compliance framework crosswalk, I think is what they call them. There's a bunch of spreadsheets out there that'll tell you exactly how, you know, a CIS assessment item translates to a NIST item, translates to a HIPAA question, et cetera, et cetera. So it's to Martin's point, it's really fairly easy. And NIST and CMMC are probably even more closely related than others. So if you started with NIST, CMMC kind of is an easy walk as well. Anthony says we use NIST to explain the high-level overview, and then moved into CIS with their CSAT tool for the granular breakdown of how we implement cybersecurity. So that's awesome. And again, CIS, the tool that he's talking about, the CIS CSAT tool, I think there's free and paid versions of that tool, if I remember correctly. So you can use the CIS CSAT tools to help you along your compliance journey with your customers. One of the things we built here at Lifecycle Insights is an assessment platform that, you know, the rest of the platform plugs in. We talk to inventories and things like that from ConnectWise, IT, Autotask, and, you know, IT Glue and some of those other tools, but you can certainly use the free tools from the frameworks that really help you get started. And the interesting conversation is that this becomes just a part of, or a core piece of, what you're doing at your MSP. And you wind up with a technical meeting every so often to just address where are we with our framework? What's the next step? How do we get a little bit better? And that's the other thing that really makes me love CIS, is that they break it down into implementation groups. And we're starting to see the same with NIST and CMMC. You know, CMMC is literally just NIST with implementation groups. So we get into a place where it gets super, super easy to prioritize and say, hey, there's a few things in this implementation group 1 that really matter before we move on to implementation group 2. You know, let's try and do the one next thing that makes us 1% better, instead of trying to boil the ocean and tackle a 150 question NIST assessment framework.
In addition to just the mappings that go between the different frameworks, there are actually paid tools which will give you the steps to get from all the way to one framework, and then tell you what work needs to be done to accomplish other frameworks too. They're pretty good.
And Tim's saying NIST has the name recognition, and that makes total sense. You know, especially if you're working with customers who are in the government space, they've heard NIST 800 171. They've heard conversations around all of this. I think the important thing for everyone is not necessarily which framework you pick. It's that you pick something and get started, right? You can agonize over this for days, weeks, months, and try and decide what framework is the right one for you. Pick one and get started. And because of these crosswalks, because of these cross maps, it's very easy for you to transition. That said, if you're in a sector that has a particular framework that matters, right? If you're in medical, go align yourselves with HIPAA. best practices are still best practices, right? You're still going to want to inventory who and what you support. You're still going to want to, roll out unique passwords and MFA and all of the other best practices that are basic cyber hygiene before you get into the really fancy things like SOC and SIM and, the real next tier of threat management and those kind of tools. So pick a framework, go after the basic cyber hygiene, knock the easy stuff off the list, I think is what you should take from this portion of the slide. Does that kind of sum it up properly there, Martin?
Also add one piece to that. Don't look at the framework as a series of checkboxes to just check off. Look at them as the collection of information of people who've had cybersecurity events. And this is what they have, in retrospect, looked at and wish they had in place that would have prevented this event. I have seen so many companies be like, will your software check these 3 boxes? And I'm like, yes, but that's not the right way to think about it. You think about what those 3 boxes mean. And Are you really being more secure by just checking those boxes, or are you just checking boxes? Because I've seen so many people with policies that are copy paste and replace, and they don't represent what they really do.
We might talk about that in a minute. So, but that reminds me of a great point. We talk to MSPs a lot. As MSPs, we're techie people. We like shiny toys. We like cool things. One of the things I always encourage MSPs as they're trying to find the perfect stack, right, is just stop for a second. Don't go out and buy another toy. Go find the problem. Go and use your framework as an example. Go find where your stack lets your framework down. Right? If you have a framework and you've already got it halfway rolled out or 2/3 rolled out or most of the way rolled out, and you've got this one item that you say, I just can't figure out how to solve this problem, then go shopping for the tool that when properly deployed helps you solve that problem. And it may be a microservice, it may just be turning on a component of 365 or upping your licensing and getting the right features in 365. It may be some Windows OS hardening functionality. It may be a third-party product that you've got to go out and buy and something that you've got to configure. But instead of going and looking for the shiny tool, it's really about, can we solve the problem that the framework item is pointing to? Because like you said, all those framework items, all the assessment items in the framework point to something that went wrong that caused a significant number of breaches. So we want to solve the problem that causes the breach, and we want a tool that does that or that helps us to do that. But know that one of the biggest reasons that folks get breached still to this day is misconfiguration of tools. So just buying a tool and sticking it in there doesn't fix the problem. We have to learn what the problem is. We have to understand how it can be affected by a bad actor and make sure that we've mitigated that impact with the tool that we bought.
Yep.
So I think we've beaten that dead horse. So let's move on. But we talked a lot about framework just because framework is a great place to start, and every MSP needs one. So if you can't right off the top of your head say this is the framework we align with, that should be your number one takeaway from this, right? Find yourself a framework and kind of get started. The second thing we're going to talk about is that internal QBR, and we did this at my MSP. I actually had signs printed and posted around the office, and I was always one for these motivational signs. Now in my office, they were all demotivational signs because I just find them funny and I have a terrible sense of humor. But around the office, we would always have, there was a sign over my desk at one point that said, if you have to do it twice, automate it. And that was kind of what led us to build Lifecycle Insights, because we were doing QBRs by hand too often. But I actually put a sign around the office when we started doing HIPAA compliance for some of our medical clients, and it was, you are client zero. So I kind of stole that language and put it up here because the purpose of running that internal QBR is to make sure that you're treating your own environment with as much or greater care than you do all of your customers. Because at the end of the day, your internal environment is that one thing that can get all of your customers breached. Right? It is literally checkmate. If you have one client get breached, that's one thing to deal with. But I sat down and did the math at one point, and it was really it just explained the problem to me in no uncertain terms. I had 5 technical humans in my office and 47 fully managed clients. If all of those clients get encrypted, each of my staff was going to get 9.5 customers and be told, you got to get them up and running.
ASAP.
Right. Yesterday, right now. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, preserve data, preserve records, preserve evidence. So, it is a big, scary thing. So the idea that we need to align our internal practices first is not some asinine guy standing on high who's already sold his MSP and doesn't have to worry about it, screaming at the clouds trying to tell MSPs what to do. It's a real world defensive mechanism, because at the end of the day, and one of the reasons we said pick a framework is because at the end of the day, MSPs carry a lot of liability. If you wind up in court one day because one of your clients got breached, you don't want the opposing counsel to be able to say, Martin, tell me, why is it that you chose to manage admin passwords the way that you did? You don't want to be able to have to go, well, I thought it was a good idea, right?
Or it was just easy.
Right. CIS and NIST recommend that I do it this way is a much more defensible answer, right? And that's why the framework's so important. And then doing some sort of an internal attestation, some sort of an internal walkthrough, just to get a status quo and a lay of the land to figure out where you are, so that you can start that, identify the status quo, plan, remediate, investigate, and kind of work your way through that circle again, is super, super, super important. And lastly, I tell everybody to actually take it one step further and give yourself a QBR, because the hardest part about some of this for MSPs, and there's math out there that says 25% of MSPs were unprofitable before the pandemic, and another 30% were just break even. Part of the difficulty here is having the budget. So one of the things we stress in the QBR is deliver your client a budget, deliver yourself an IT budget when you're having this conversation. I think it's super important. And with that, I'm going to read the comments here and I'll let you respond to that.
The internal budgeting and being profitable as MSP is very important. And when you can go to your client, when you take a QBR to your clients, or you take any sort of trust that you've built with your clients, and you go to your clients, they're much more likely to just accept your recommendation and move forward and then buy something that you're trying to sell because they trust you, which is what it's all about. You need your clients to trust you as the expert.
Yep. And Anthony's up here reciting to us the DNS haiku, which I always love. But yes, at the end of the day, this is about being defensible. This is about making sure that when insurance gets called in, they're willing to pay the insurance claim because you did what you told them that you would do. Does green mean control deployed? Yellow, yes, green means control deployed. Yellow means either in process or planned, and red means not started. So you're absolutely right. Those are completely random answers that I grabbed off of an assessment last night to take a screenshot for the slide. So they were for a demo client in my test environment. But yes, there's a lot that needs to be answered for if your assessment looks like this. So but this is just the concept of make sure that we walk ourselves through a framework, make sure that we have the conversation, make sure that we're doing some planning and that we're building something that moves the needle for us as an MSP. And one of the key points to that is make sure you know how you're going to pay for it. As MSPs, we stress over adding $1 per endpoint to our stack. And that can be nothing compared to what compliance can cost. And the only thing more expensive than compliance is being out of compliance. So think about it from that standpoint. This one kind of leans into your wheelhouse here, Martin. I'm going to let you talk about it, but the Ponemon Institute really kind of stole your thunder and has posted a couple graphs. Do you want to explain those graphs, or do you want me to go through them real fast?
You go through them real quick, and I'll jump in.
So what we have here on the left-hand image, we're measuring in millions of US dollars, so $4.9 billion in breaches. Is the top. I'm sorry, that's 490 million. Now I'm going to have to redo the math. But anyway, what we're looking at is stolen and compromised credentials account for almost 20% of breaches, and was the fourth most expensive kind of breach to happen. This is according to the Ponemon Institute 2022 data breach report. They do these every year. The link to it is down there at the bottom if you guys want to go check it out. It is a really cool, there's a lot of slicing and dicing of the data around all these data breaches over the last year. And they talk about what are the most expensive kinds of breaches, what are the things you can do in your environment to mitigate a breach. And then stolen or compromised credentials also, as we look at it, is the thing that allows the longest dwell time. So when a hacker gets access to your environment, if they've stolen or compromised credentials, it typically means they can dwell on your environment for somewhere between 250 and 330 days before they're detected, which means data exfiltration, which is why it's so expensive. It really means that there is a significant impact by the time that breach is discovered and by the time that anything is actionable. These are the kind of breaches that put people out of business. It was just interesting to me that credentials kind of topped everything. And you and I are standing here talking about bringing this as a point of conversation. I was actually reading this report for another webinar I was doing, and I thought, this is exactly the conversation Martin and I are getting ready to have. So for that, let's talk about privileged account management and how to do it right.
Privileged account management, those stolen credentials, you can go out on the dark web and you can easily find a list of 1 million passwords and usernames to buy. And if you look through those, some percentage of those are administrative credentials from MSPs. And if you're just looking through that list and you do some evaluation, you'll find credentials that are like administrator, and the password is the name of the MSP, rocks, exclamation point. It is, and you know.
How did you know my super secret password?
Because I've seen it on Excel spreadsheets, and you know that password is used not just on one client, but on all the clients. And it hasn't changed in years. I've seen terrible things with stolen credentials. And a lot of them, especially MSP credentials, are extra valuable because lots of times you can look at one and it's a pattern that you can guess to get into another client. Way that you address that is the most simple thing in the world. You change the password on a regular basis, you know?
Yeah.
And you make it something that is, you can't remember, you don't know, you either have to look it up or use a tool to enter it. And that, along with changing on a regular basis, will prevent that access. And then also do that, you have some monitoring. Like you watch who logs in. You have a team or some stack or some software that says, these people logged in, and then you can watch to see if it's out of bounds of their normal access.
Right. So if I'm logging in from Beijing at 2:30 in the morning, somebody might want to know about it.
Talking to somebody else about this earlier today, that a lot of MSPs use a shared administrator login to all their clients. All the technicians share one administrator login. It's the most common way that MSPs do access. It's wrong based on every security framework. All the ones we talked about, they say that's not allowed, but that's what most MSPs do. And that means that if you looked at where that account was used and logged in, you really can't do any evaluation on it. The proper way to do privileged account management is a unique credential for each person.
Right.
Then you can do that evaluation.
And we started doing that in 2008 at my MSP with automate scripts. And we literally had Perl scripts that went out, and when we created a new user and we hired a new engineer, we ran a Perl script on the environments that we wanted to create that user in. And then they were responsible for maintaining their passwords in those environments. And we used LastPass at the time, and they would keep all of their domain accounts in LastPass. Obviously, that has its own struggle or challenge. And Anthony's talking about using something like Bitwarden to do this. That's the first way of doing this, right? Before the technology existed, the best we could do is manually manage passwords. And the beauty of it was when an engineer left the company, I knew, first initial last name @domain.com was who my user was. I could run a script against it. I could nuke that user out of every device, out of every network, very, very quickly. But it's manual. It's hard. It takes a lot of work. You got to maintain scripts. You got to maintain automation. So, I appreciate that you guys are really taking a swing at and trying to tackle this problem. Obviously, it's a big one. If IBM and the Ponemon Institute are out there talking about it. Give me your, Anthony's asked, so give me your view on, trying to put this stuff into a password manager like Bitwarden. I mean, Bitwarden's my password manager of choice today for my personal stuff. But as an MSP, what do they need to be aware of? What do they need to be cognizant of when they're using a tool like that?
Be aware that you really need to make an account for every individual on every domain, every Azure tenant, every place that they need access. Individual needs to have a unique account, needs to be traceable. If you're a medium-sized MSP or a large MSP and that's hundreds of accounts, you need to automate all of that. And those, like from a cybersecurity perspective, those passwords need to rotate frequently because they have so much power in that account. And if it's leaked or it's stolen or you have a hash attack or somebody looks over their shoulder and steals it just when they type it in, you have to automate all of that. And if you can automate it so that the password's never actually seen, that's even the best.
Yep.
Then the engineer doesn't accidentally give it away.
Yeah. And Anthony's talking about writing a PowerShell script for it. I'll date myself. We used Perl scripts, but that's okay.
Yeah. The PowerShell scripts, we have several clients who have in the past written PowerShell scripts, written their own Perl scripts. And I have to brag, every person that we've talked to who has written their own script for maintaining this has stopped, decided they're not in the business of writing script, and uses TechIDManager to manage privilege accounts across their infrastructure. It is all the shell scripts we've seen have issues, either reliability issues or maintenance issues, or they are not passing the password encrypted on the wire when it goes to all these places.
Right.
We've seen all the variants too. Like we saw a guy who had a script that ran only from his computer, where the technician came and sat down every 90 days, typed in a brand new password on this guy, the owner's computer, and it pushed it out to all the clients. So each technician had a unique account, but the password was the same everywhere.
Right.
Like, so you got side elevation, you need a different password everywhere. So a password manager is a great thing to use with that. But then you have to have automation to change it at the end site and push it into that place for each technician separately.
Right. And, we've heard the horror stories of, storing all that stuff in a documentation platform, and then the documentation platform gets beat. That's not much better or different than storing it into a password manager. You can still have those concerns, but to be totally transparent, right? Something is better than nothing. This is all about budget and prioritization. So take a step back from here, make sure that you're having the bigger conversation, budget for these kind of things, work these into your pricing, into your agreements for your customers, and work yourself into it with partners who will give you NFRs or who will work with you to help you get started. There's a lot of vendors out there who will help you get into their platforms and see the value, without a $10 million minimum subscription. So there's a lot of small to mid-sized vendors out there who will work with you a lot easier. So keep that in mind. So that kind of covers that component of it. I want to talk about policies and procedures, and this one's interesting because I'm actually doing a webinar next week with Tim Golden about policy and about all things policy that can create problems for us. But 6 months or so ago, I had Matt Lee from PAX8 and Brian Blakely from Cosent Cybersecurity. And these two are a pair of characters. They're entertaining as heck to watch, but they gave us 2 hours on policy and procedure and why they matter. It was really interesting. I learned a ton just in the prep calls for these. And in one of the prep calls, Matt Lee said, a shitty what we actually do policy is significantly better than the best aspirational find and replace policy. And that was just one of those moments where somebody said something in just the right words that it hit home to me, and I was going to keep it in my brain that way forever. And it just said to me, the way that we all have been doing policy for so long is not the appropriate way anymore. There's a lot of problems that happen with this. On our next slide, we'll get into one particular use case. But what were you guys doing for policy, or what do you recommend for policy and procedure that can help set an MSP up for success?
I've worked in all kinds of different industries, and the most relevant experience I've had is in manufacturing, where they used ISO standards, ISO 9001, ISO 8000, stuff like that, where the requirement was to document what you did. Documenting what you did was more important than some pie in the sky, oh, this is what we should do, but we don't actually do it. And that has always been the best way I think you can do it. Because if you actually document what you do every day, all the time, then you can actually look at the document and say, oh, these are places we can improve. It's the actual implementation in the standard of what Matt says there.
Well, one of the most important things that I learned, and we didn't do a ton of compliance stuff, at that point, when I had my MSP, HIPAA was self-attestation. So it was easy. Maybe not always 100% right, but it was self-attestation. But what I learned was that in the more serious compliance frameworks, if a policy is more than 12 months old, it might as well not exist at all. And I thought that was pretty interesting. How many MSPs on this call help your client review every one of their policies and procedures and actually make an update, or at least a note that it's been reviewed and no changes were required in the last 12 months, right? This is really a portion of where policy and procedure breaks down. I can tell you, at my MSP, we wrote an employee acceptable use and acceptable use policy, stuck it in an employee handbook, and didn't touch it for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
And so if we were in any kind of a compliance audit, this would be something that didn't pass muster. I'll say we stole some really big complex policies and tried to adapt them to our use case. When we got done doing this in the workshop that I did with Matt and Brian, I was super impressed to see how much shorter the policies were, and how when they got done with them, they were actually written in the client's language instead of sans.org language that doesn't necessarily mean anything to anybody. And I thought that was really interesting and really telling. But in an industry where we can barely get folks to come to the table to have a quarterly business review, I think it's worth note that we need to do more than that with our customer. We need to have them come to the table on a regular basis to review and update policies. And we need to do the same internally.
Yeah. And you need to go to your client and be like, what are you doing on a regular basis? And how can we help you do that?
Yeah.
You know,
there are at least 20 policies that every MSP should have, and they might be combined down into just a few. But, if you think about data destruction policies, if you think about electronic funds transfer policies, all kinds of things, these are things that you really need to have insight with your customer on. And to Martin's point, you have to go to your customer and talk about it. And really, you have to have your customer provide you with a copy of all of their policies. If you don't have the policy, how can you operate their IT in a way that supports and enforces that policy?
And their procedures. Like, what does their procedure say about getting someone a new computer? Are you involved in that? Are you involved in getting rid of the old computer? Yep. If it's not in your client's procedures that say, call this MSP to get a new computer or to destroy the computer, that's a place you should plug yourself in and be like, hey, we can help you with this. Let's really work through this and make sure that you have the best computers possible.
Yeah. So, I always like to go to the electronic funds transfer policy because I think there's a huge duh moment right here where the MSP gets a new engineer. They put him out on the help desk. He's been on the help desk for 2-3 weeks. He's finally taking calls by himself. Maybe he's here a month, taking calls by himself. He gets a call. He opens ConnectWise, pops into the ticket. It pops up and says, this ticket's a VIP user. Make sure you give them everything they need. He's on the phone. The CFO from the client introduces themselves. He says, no problem, Mr. CFO. What can I help you with? Well, I'm trying to wire some money and I'm having a problem. Can you log into my screen and help me through this? I'm in a real rush. Right? What is your brand new engineer who wants to make Martin feel good about them, who wants to go, Martin's got to love me by the end of this. He's going to be so happy with the way that I dealt with this. I'm going to do everything right. I'm going to make sure this customer gets white glove treatment. I'm going to help this person wire some money. Right?
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Is anybody on this call confident that no engineer you've ever hired would have done that? Do you have a policy in place that says, before we do things like wire money, disable content filtering, whitelist applications and whitelist other things, that your folks know where to go to find that SOP and that they're going to go to look it up? I hope you have an SOP for it. You should. You should have an SOP that says, go check the client's policies and procedures and make sure it's appropriate in their environment, right? My answer was, we don't wire money. That was the company rule. It was a real short policy. We don't wire money, period. It was the easiest policy we ever wrote. But, the day that your engineer, your brand new rookie kid who's trying to show off for the boss, goes and helps somebody wire $20, $30, $50, $100,000, how badly do you think that is going to go for you? So, and I use that example a little bit facetiously because hopefully it's never going to happen. But I think it's an example you can sit down in front of your customer and say, what if this happened? And I don't know what your policies are. This, Mr. Customer, is why you should share your policies and procedures with me. So when we went through, we had a checklist for all of our clients' policies and procedures, and we would never mark them better than in progress unless they had been delivered to us in their final version. And that final version was less than a year old because we needed to know we had the latest copy of that client's policy. So just give some thought to that. If you have a list of 10, 15, 20 policies you think your client ought to have them give you that list of policies. They may be combined into employee handbook or an acceptable use policy or something like that. But make sure you can check all those boxes. Make sure you know where they come from and make sure they're in a place where your engineers all know what the first place to look is, know how to find what they need and can get through there. Because to Anthony's point, don't touch the financial stuff without double confirmation. I mean, it really should be stop. You don't do anything financial without getting the help desk manager to say, yep, this is definitely something that we want to do, right? How long does that take? 60 seconds on Teams? Yeah. You can stall the customer that long. So
And
policy and procedure is bigger than you think it is, I think is the takeaway here.
And I think you should also put in your MSP time for you to update and time for the engineers to read these policies and understand them. At least have a meeting once a quarter that says, hey, here are the policies. Let's go over and make sure you understand them. And let's look at the things that have changed. Because if you have all these beautiful policies and procedures and you hire that new engineer and you never give him time to read them and you don't sit down with him and talk about them, it doesn't matter what they say. If he doesn't know them, he doesn't know them, he's not going to follow them.
They should be part of training and onboarding. There should be time set aside and scheduled for your leadership team to reevaluate policies. We would do 2 or 3 policies a month because we knew if we waited till quarterly or once a year to try and do them all, it was just too overwhelming. And if you just put, the third Friday of the month from 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you read 3 policies and make sure that they're up to date. Maybe you walk home with some homework, or maybe some of it doesn't get done until the next week, but at least it gives you that point to say, I'm going to carve out this much time to just glance at some of these policies and make sure they're right. And worst case, I'm going to go back to the bottom. And the thing I didn't ever do was go back to them and say, these policies are right. They're, attest that I've reviewed them and no changes are required. I wasn't good about keeping an audit log. Know that today your insurance companies and your compliance requirements are going to want you to keep an audit log. So even if you review it and change nothing, document that. I think it's an important note that most of us wouldn't think about if we don't live in the high compliance world. But I think that is something that's coming down out of the high compliance world and going to land in our laps as just best practice for everyone pretty quickly.
Yep.
So we've talked about 4 things that MSP should be doing. Let's talk about the 5th one. And I think this one is super critical. Everybody's talking about it today, but it's kind of like the weather. Everybody's talking about it. Nobody seems to really be doing anything about it. Why don't you lead us off on cyber insurance? Because this one's huge.
Their cyber insurance is big. It has huge questionnaires you have to check. And there's a lot of things in there that companies are checking yes to. And they're really pretzel logicking, or they're like contorting the way that they think they can check yes without actually solidly being able to check yes. MFA, like on the screen here, is an excellent representation of that. Like the insurance questionnaires say, are using MFA for all privileged accounts everywhere. And MSPs will read that and be like, we have MFA when you log into ConnectWise, and then you have to use ConnectWise to get to Screen Connect, and then you have to use that to connect to the client computer. So yeah, there was MFA on that chain. Yeah. But that is not what the questionnaire is asking. The questionnaire is asking, do you have MFA logging into the client network no matter how you log in? So if you go sit in front of the computer, or if you go remote in with RDP or Screen Connect or some other remote connection tool, they want to know that you have MFA on every account. And it is something that's one of 50 to 100 questions. And it is more complicated than most people think. And it's not something you can sideways logic your way into. We have MFA somewhere, so thus we have it everywhere. Because I think that this article is specifically referring to a client that said, yes, we had MFA.
They said we have MFA everywhere, and they had it on remote access VPN, and I think Microsoft 365, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I forget exactly how they got beat, but they got beat another way where MFA probably would have stopped it and contained it. So the insurance company decided they would pay 10% and sued to cancel the policy. So this is an extreme example, but these are the conversations that we want to be aware of and that we want to talk about, right? MFA is hard. MFA takes a ton of work, and in most cases, you're never going to be able to sign something that says we have MFA everywhere.
MFA everywhere is a huge goal. It is achievable, but it's huge. It requires centralized authentication source, outsourcing of all logins to the same centralized authentication source, and then MFA on that source. It's a lot of connecting of pieces, especially that the medium and smaller MSPs just don't do.
And it assumes that you don't have a marketing department who needs to go out and sign up for Canva or some crap that that doesn't support it, right? There's going to be that weird thing that you need to access that doesn't support MFA. Mm-hmm. There's going to be that bank that only supports MFA via text message, and you're going to need to document those exceptions. When the insurance company says, have you deployed MFA correctly everywhere? And then you come back and say, well, it's text message MFA at the bank. The insurance company is going to go, well, shoot, even the federal government doesn't think that's appropriate. And right? And their security
Yeah.
standards have been known to be a little suspect from time to time. So, but those things exist, right? I have a Bank of America account that's the only MFA option. So there are, especially when you're filling out these claims and these questionnaires. I got some really good advice from Justin Reinmuth about a week ago. And what he said was, when they get really, really specific with their questions, like MFA everywhere, he says, you need to give a very detailed answer. Right. I guess he said when they're vague, like, is this deployed ever? You need to give a very detailed answer. We have MFA here, 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 and here, and the bank only supports it by text messaging. And let them infer where you don't have it and whether or not that's appropriate. And then when they get really, really specific and say, do you have a 24/7 manned SOC with, and are you using Sentinel-1, next gen, anti-malware or whatever you want to call it, EDR, then get a little vague and step back and let them say, hey, we have this EDR and we have a SOC. But there, some of these insurance questionnaires are even asking how many humans work in the SOC that you've hired, or that you run. Sometimes that's just not information that you have and that somebody's willing to give you. So the last bit of advice I'll give you is, when in doubt, don't answer a question that you're not sure about. Go get an insurance provider. Go get another insurance provider to look at this. There are some great ones in this industry. The guys at Fifth Wall are fantastic. Justin Reinmuth over at TechRug, spot on. The dude is great. They're just the two that I know the best in this space, but there are a lot of them. Go find someone who lives in that space and get them to help you through these questionnaires. In our assessment platform, we've had the benefit of Fifth Wall giving us a combination of about 55 questions that they see on most insurance applications across like 35 carriers. So if you ever want to see what those questionnaires look like, my contact info is at the end of this. If you want to see what those questionnaires look like, ping me either on LinkedIn or by email when you see that contact slide, and I will send you a copy of what that assessment looks like. Fifth Wall was gracious enough to put it together, but we try and share it across the community so that when you're sitting with a customer trying to help them be prepared for that assessment that's coming, when their insurance renewal is coming, you can answer these questions ahead of time so that you're in a better place when the questionnaire gets dropped in your lap, right? We don't want to come back to our customer when that questionnaire shows up and say, I had to mark these 17 things. No, remember I told you so about all these? I've been trying to sell you these for 3 years. We want to have that conversation a little earlier. I
think there's also a conversation you want to have with your clients who have not brought you a cyber insurance questionnaire, and be like, hey, did you fill one of these out without talking to me? Because I have seen that happen where the customer just fills it out and then expects that the MSP was doing all those things.
Right.
A great way to start that conversation. And there's also a question I'd love to answer in the chat.
I would love for you to answer it, because I don't know the answer other than my MFA is I use Authy and it's searchable. So, and that's the only way I can live, because MFA is a real challenge.
So as a technician at an MSP, the first step to getting MFA everywhere is having a unique account for each engineer everywhere. Only when you have a unique account can the MFA then be proving that you are the person who's logging in. And when you have a unique account, the MFA can be a push MFA, so that when you go to log in, you enter your credentials, your phone just pops up, allow or deny, you click allow and you move on. You don't have to go look up an OTP token. When you have that many OTP tokens, to me, I could be off base here, but that says that you are trying to share that MFA across one login for all these technicians into your clients' networks. I have seen that.
I think what he said, I don't think that's what he's saying. I think what he's saying is he has his own account at each client, and each one requires its own MFA, right? So now across 40 clients, he's got 40 OTPs, which is a real pain, especially when you figure one for each client for the domain, and then another for each client for email or a line of business app or whatever else. Centralizing those with some sort of SSO or some sort of consolidated sign-on is definitely a huge.
Yeah, or switching to push MA for all of them so that they're not OTPs.
Yeah,
OTP is like not as good as the push MFAs that are out there, and the push MFAs make it literally you don't have to search for it; it just pops up and you click allow. Yep. That is the only way to really scale MFA to the level that MSPs are being required to scale it to.
Awesome. That's good. That's good to know. That's good information. So let's dive off. Let's go back off of MFA and let's just kind of double down on cyber insurance here. A couple other things that we want to talk about. Number one, you should require it from all of your clients. If any of you have looked at your policy this year and then go look at that cost of a data breach report, you don't own enough insurance to pay out if all of your clients get breached, right? You couldn't possibly buy enough. No provider will sell you enough for you to cover all of your clients. And that's everything you need to know about proof that your client has to buy their own, has to be accountable for their own. You should make sure that you talk to a qualified expert and you get the right help on it. Always engage the insurance company before an incident, right? If you're in an incident response scenario, the first phone call you make should be to the insurance company. They're who's going to determine who gets paid to help clean up. They're going to be the one who assigns you a breach coach, assigns you counsel, does those kind of things. And if you don't call them first, you could be in trouble. So you need to know that your client not only has insurance, but you need to know the contact information for a breach before it ever happens. So if you're doing DR planning, if you're doing incident response planning for your client, this should be part of it. So make sure that if you don't have this stuff included, it's part of the conversation. And then last but not least, store your policy offline. There are some stories out there of ransomware gangs actually looking for your insurance policy online, finding it, reading it, knowing exactly how much insurance you have, and asking for your ransom to be just a little bit more than that so that your insurance company pays out in full and you still have to come out of some money out of pocket. So understand that this information should not be something that's just hanging out where someone who breaches a network could gain access to it. And last but not least, if you think a question even borders on you giving insurance advice, you are not a registered insurance agent. Don't freaking answer it. Go get a registered insurance agent to have the conversation. There are things that you can actually get in trouble for saying, like, yes, Mr. Customer, I believe you have appropriate coverage for your size of business. Those are words you should never mutter. Just don't is the best answer that I have.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Know where you're an expert and know where you're not. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happened with Uber, whether it's your client's insurance or yours, you're not going to get to make that choice. The court is going to make that choice, right? Their insurance company is probably going to sue you. Your insurance company is probably going to fight back with them. It's going to be a whole rigmarole back and forth. And the most important thing for you is that you have enough coverage that your insurance company goes and picks that fight and you don't have to. Because those folks will talk long and slow to each other until they've exhausted a ton of money and resources, and the only person who wins there is the attorneys. You just don't want to be involved in that. So make sure that your coverage is appropriate. So with that, we're kind of running short on time here. Let's kind of wrap it up. Martin, I appreciate you hanging out here today. Obviously, you guys have a product. You're here to sell a product. We want to talk about some things that move the needle for MSPs. But if somebody wants to learn more about TechIDManager, do you want to give us just a quick high-level overview and then where they can go to maybe catch a demo or learn more from you guys?
Every cybersecurity framework, everyone I mentioned today and everyone that's out there says that an account should belong to a person and you should never share accounts. This is standard in the enterprise space, it's standard in the government space, but for MSPs, it's difficult because of the number of technicians and the number of clients, a little bit of math. If you have a medium-sized MSP, you're making thousands of accounts for your technicians, and then you have to change thousands of passwords, set thousands of rights. That's just untenable. So if you want to maintain compliance with any security framework, you need a unique account for every technician everywhere they have access. In order for that to work for an MSP, you need to automatically have software that automatically creates those accounts, automatically disables those accounts when somebody leaves, automatically rotates all the passwords for all of those clients everywhere very frequently. That is what TechIDManager does. We create unique accounts for every MSP technician everywhere they need access on Azure AD, on domains, on work groups, a bunch of other places we're working on. Auto-rotate those passwords. And as an MSP, you need to be downtime tolerant in all your software. So TechIDManager has some significant downtime tolerance features built into it so that even if you're offline, your client's offline, you can still log in. Your technicians can still access and log into the clients, get them back on the internet, and you don't go down. And you need, because you have like the fatigue that some people are talking about in the chat there, if you have a unique account for everywhere you have access and you have 400 clients, that means you have 400 accounts, possibly more if there's also Azure accounts and backup machines on those networks. You need to have a quick way to find and inject those credentials in whatever remote connection tools you use. That is efficiency that we've built into TechIDManager interface for you. So stop sharing your admin accounts. If you want a demo, want to know more information, ruffiansoftware.com/demo. We have all kinds of information up there. We'd love to show it to you.
Awesome. Awesome. So ruffiansoftware.com/demo. I'll tell you guys, it's a cheap application. It's not expensive. Based on the value that it delivers, everybody should at least take a look. We'll talk Lifecycle Insights really, really quick. A lot of you guys already know who we are. You came here from our mailing list, so we appreciate you coming and hanging out today. If your quarterly business reviews take up too much of your time, are too inconsistent, are really tough for you guys to delegate or have real value delivered to your customer on. If you ever get that pushback where your customer says, hey, you know what, everything's fine, we don't really need to meet, it's probably a sign that you haven't done a good job on your QBR in the past. And some of that may be your fault, but a lot of that is the fault of ConnectWise turns into the junk drawer. We file all of our data into it, and then it's hard to sort it and pull it back out and put it in a usable fashion. So we've built a tool that helps you automate that QBR, really delegate some of the time-consuming work, delegate the pieces we can't automate. Obviously, you can see by all of our one-star reviews, we've got some raving fans out there, some folks who really feel like we've done the right thing by them. If you want to learn more about us, lifecycleinsights.io/contact-us. And that'll get you a free, either a demo, or you can go over to the pricing page and get a free trial. Our pricing is right on the website. We're pretty public about that. We try and keep it out there where everybody can get all their questions answered. So there's the big hard sales pitch at the end that marketing always wants us to do. And with that kind of wraps it up, right? If you guys want to follow up with Martin, follow him on LinkedIn, send him an email. Go see if you can fish his password out of him. That'd be entertaining. And then if you want to follow up with me, Alex.Farling, lifecycleinsights.io, and follow me on LinkedIn. We're happy to continue the conversation and carry it on over there, but we had planned to take up about 45 minutes of this. So I appreciate everybody staying over for 6-7 minutes. And with that, we'll take any questions you've got, but other than that, we'll wish you guys a happy day and let you go. Martin, thanks so much for coming. That was fun.
Thanks for having me, Alex. It was a lot of fun.
We got a lot of chat conversation. That tells me people got something out of it.
Oh, yeah. It was really good.
Well, I don't think we've got any questions, so we're going to go ahead and let everybody roll out of here.
All right. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.